still a wet one would be good. All right, we're talking about island hopping in the Pacific, and we mentioned yesterday that what we're trying to do in the Pacific is take control of these Japanese-controlled islands so we can set up air bases and military bases for what we anticipate is going to be an invasion on the homeland of Japan. That's kind of the strategy here. So our subtopic today is the road to victory in the Pacific, Iwo Jima. Okay, the road to victory in the Pacific, Iwo Jima. Now I think everybody that knows anything about anything knows about this famous photograph. And but I want to get into some details so that when we get to Washington, D.C., that you really can appreciate what that amounts to. And there's new controversy over it, which I think is kind of interesting that we'll talk about too. So you happen to be the class that comes in at the right time. Well, it was on February 19th of 1945, in which D-Day in the Pacific occurred. So we had D-Day in Europe on the beaches, on Omaha Beach and Normandy, France, and your D-Day in the Pacific was on February 19th, 1945, when United States Marines landed on the beaches of Iwo Jima. And it was an island in the Pacific, okay? So on February 19th, 1945, also known as D-Day in the Pacific, United States Marines landed on the beaches of Iwo Jima, which again was an island, ironically, that was only 750 miles from Tokyo, Japan. So it was an island very close to the inland Japan. So again, on February 19th, 1945, also known as D-Day in the Pacific, United States Marines landed on the beaches of Iwo Jima, which was just 750 miles from Tokyo, Japan. Now this landing on the beaches of Iwo Jima would be very similar to the landing on the beaches of Omaha Beach. That's the kind of action you were going to see. That same type of, storming the beaches and being shot at from bunkers on the island. It was the same type of thing. And actually, this is going to be even more bloodier than Normandy. This will be one of the bloodiest fights in Marine Corps history at Iwo Jima. This will take nearly 7,000 lives and leave an additional 20,000 American Marines wounded. So this was a tough, tough fight at Iwo Jima. And everybody thinks we just stormed the top of Mount Suribachi, planted the flag, and it was over. Okay, that's not true. So this is going to be one of the bloodiest fights in Marine Corps history. It's going to take nearly 7,000 American Marines' lives and also result in additional approximately 20,000 Marines wounded. Very, very bloody fight at Iwo Jima. Now, again, as we mentioned, I don't think you have to write this down, the securing of Iwo Jima was crucial to the United States as they needed an important airfield for bombing the homeland of Japan. That's why we were trying to take the island in the first place. Now remember, these Japanese that had been kind of whisked away from these other islands in the Pacific that were taking or moving to other islands. And so the Japanese were dug in very deep in Iwo Jima. They were in bunkers, and there was actually tunnels dug that led from one bunker to another. What I mean by a bunker is an open area where they could fire machine guns from, okay? And they had this really detailed tunnel system that they could go underground from one bunker to another. They were very, very well established, well thought out at Iwo Jima because they did not want to lose this island to the United States. Now, from the high points on the island, the Japanese would fire machine guns and they would launch bombs at the incoming landing crafts and amphibious tanks that were trying to secure the island. Very, very similar to the invasion at Normandy. Very similar action. Now, in this particular fight, there will be 70,000 American soldiers fighting at Iwo Jima. That's just incredible when you think about it. 70,000 American soldiers. Because the island's not very big. Against approximately 22,000 Japanese. And most of these 70,000 American soldiers that are fighting against nearly 22,000 Japanese are both too young to vote and too young to drink alcohol legally. That's how young these Marines are that are hitting the base. They're too young to vote at this point, and they're also too young to consume alcohol. So you're talking about, boys, kids about your age or a year older that are storming the beaches of Iwo Jima with this type of casualty rate. They estimated that an American Marine was struck down roughly every 30 seconds during the initial storming of the beaches of Iwo Jima. An American Marine was struck down roughly every 30 seconds as they tried to storm the beaches. Now, at the end of the first day of fighting, they estimated 2,000 Americans were either killed or wounded. The first day. 2,000 Americans were either killed or wounded the first day of fighting at Iwo Jima. And again, this island was 8 square miles. That's how big it was. And there were almost 100,000 soldiers on both sides on an island that measured 8 square miles. Now, at the very top of Iwo Jima was a dormant volcano known as Mount Suribachi. So at the very top of Iwo Jima, which was the top of the 8 square mile island, was a dormant volcano known as Mount Suribachi. Now, we took quite a hike to get up to Pilot's Knob, didn't we, at Fort Phil Kearny? Can you imagine the difference in distance between that and getting to the top of Mount Suribachi? Well, on February 24th, which was the 5th day of the battle, on February 24th, the 5th day of the battle, after thousands of American Marines have died, the decision was made that they needed to take that high point at Mount Suribachi. Okay? So on February 24th, 1945, which was the 5th day of the battle, after thousands of Marines had been killed, the decision was made that that high point needed to be taken, Mount Suribachi. So 40 Marines from Easy Company, which is on your ID sheet, I believe, isn't it? 40 Marines from Easy Company were ordered to climb to the top of the dormant volcano to seize control of that high ground. So on February 24th, 1945, the 5th day of the battle, after thousands of Marines have already been killed, the decision was made to take the high ground that included Mount Suribachi. And so 40 Marines from Easy Company were ordered to climb to the top of that dormant volcano and seize control of Mount Suribachi. And what did they take with them? An American flag. And they were to raise it if they made it to the top of Mount Suribachi and gain control. That was the order. So 40 Marines from Easy Company took an American flag with them and were ordered to raise the flag over Mount Suribachi if indeed they made it to the top. Now, once this group of Marines made it to the summit and raised the flag, it would be the first time in the war that the Stars and Stripes flew over Japanese soil. First time. So once the Marines made it to the summit, they raised the American flag, which was visible, kind of, to the Marines that were lower on the beaches. And what this flag did is it rallied the Marines to give them more motivation to take the entire island. That's correct. Very good. Now, because the Marine brass, what is the Marine brass? Upper echelon commanders. As Mason said, because they wanted a bigger flag to be displayed from Mount Suribachi so it could be seen from further away, they ordered Marine Private First Class Rene Gagnon to take another larger American flag to the summit. So they get the first flag up and it's been planted. Okay, everybody's excited to a point, gives them motivation to take the rest of the island. But the Marine brass wanted a bigger flag up there. And so they ordered Marine Private First Class Rene Gagnon to take a larger flag to the summit. And two very important people went with Gagnon to the summit, and they were both photographers. One was Associate Press or AP photographer Joseph Rosenthal, and the other was military cameraman Staff Sergeant Bill Genhost. So along with Gagnon, the Marine First Class that was ordered to take a larger flag to the summit, 2 important photographers scaled the summit of Iwo Jima with him. AP or Associated Press photographer Joseph Rosenthal and military cameraman Staff Sergeant Bill Genhost. Now, this is important you understand because a lot of people really do not understand this. Once that Gagnon, Rosenthal, and Genhost got to the top of Mount Suribachi, it was then that Joseph Rosenthal took his famous photograph of the second flag raising. And Bill Genhost recorded it with his movie camera. So there were 2 flag raising at Mount Suribachi. A lot of people don't know that. The first one was done with a smaller flag. The second one was done on orders of the military or Marine brass because they wanted a bigger flag. And it was Marine Private First Class Rene Gagnon that was ordered to take that larger flag to the summit. And Joseph Rosenthal and Ben Genhost went with him. And it was Joseph Rosenthal that took this very famous picture right here that you all know in history. Okay? Very famous photo. We'll talk more about it later. Now, this is quite a story. After these photographs were taken, there was more than one. Rosenthal took more than one photograph. But it was this one that caught everybody's eye. But after these photographs were taken with the Marines, and we have photographs of both the first and second raising. It wasn't Rosenthal that took the first raising photos. There were other people there. But after these photographs, fighting continued on the island with the worst yet to come. Most people think that that was the end of it. Actually, the worst was yet to come after the 5th day. Because this battle would last another 31 days. And a lot of people don't know that. It would be 31 days after the second and first flag raising at Iwo Jima at Mount Suribachi before victory could be claimed by the United States. Okay? Well, once Rosenthal got done taking his pictures, they sent his film to nearby Guam. For what reason? To be developed. And within days, President Roosevelt saw this famous photograph at Mount Suribachi. He got his first viewing on it within days after it was developed in Guam. So Rosenthal's film was sent to nearby Guam, and it was developed, and within days, President Roosevelt saw the famous photograph. I think I kind of keyed in on some of this before, but what does Roosevelt want when he sees the photograph? He wants the 6 soldiers identified and brought back to the United States as heroes. Because actually what he's going to use them for, because we're needing some money, is to go out and do a war bond raising effort as heroes of the flag raisers of Iwo Jima. So the president immediately wants the 6 soldiers in the photo identified, and he wants them, once they're identified, to be brought back to the United States and deemed as heroes and helping with the war bond drive. That's his goal. Well, the only problem is, we have time. It isn't like, it is today. And it was a month after the second flag raising that this occurred. And so, unfortunately, we're going to have some issues here. So, who does President Roosevelt, I shouldn't say it that way. Who are they going to ask to identify the 6 Marines that lifted up the flag in the second flag raising? Who are they going to ask to do it? Not Rosenthal, ironically. They're going to ask Private First Class Rene Gagnon to do it. Okay? So they find Gagnon, and he's asked to identify the 6 soldiers in the photograph. He's shown the photograph and said, who are these people? Well, he identified the 5 other soldiers. Unfortunately, 3 of them had been killed at Iwo Jima during that time. So we had 3 of them that were killed in action on the island. So Gagnon identified the 5 soldiers other than himself, but 3 had been killed at Iwo Jima. This is who he identified. This is where I'd like you to take out your little sketch here. Okay? Now, you might see some discrepancies, and that's the idea. And I want you to take your map, and if you see any discrepancies on what Gagnon first said and what I have on this, note those. Okay, he identified Marine Sergeant Henry Oliver Hansen as one of the flag raisers. Henry Oliver Hansen. Do you see a Henry Oliver Hansen on my diagram? So keep that in mind. So this is who Gagnon identified. Okay? He identified Marine Sergeant Henry Oliver Hansen. He also identified a Navy corpsman by the name of John H. Bradley. Now, what's a Navy corpsman? What's a corpsman? You know? Medic. Okay, it's a medic. So he wasn't a Marine. He was a Navy corpsman there to serve as a medic. And he was identified. Do you see him on the drawing? Yeah. He also identified Private First Class Ira Hayes, who ironically was an American Indian. Ira Hayes was an American Indian. You see him in the picture. Okay? So we got Marine Sergeant Henry Oliver Hansen, who we do not see in the picture. We have Navy Corpsman John H. Bradley, who we do see in the picture. We have Private First Class Ira Hayes, who we do see in the picture, who's Native American. We also have Private First Class identified by Gagnon Franklin R. Sousley. You see Franklin Sousley. Okay? And the final man that Gagnon identified as the 6 flag bearers at Iwo Jima, the second raising, was Sergeant Michael Strank. You see Michael Strank on your picture, kind of. Now, here's the thing. You always see the picture, right? So who's this? You know, put a process of elimination. According to Gagnon, who's this? Well, you got it here, but Hansen, right? Okay, who is this right here? John Bradley. Who is this right here? Frank Sousley. Who's this back here? Okay. Who's this right here? Strank. And who's this? Renee Gagnon. Okay, keep that in mind. Now this is how he identified him. Okay, that's how he identified him. Now, late in 1946, after the Battle of Iwo Jima, obviously, Ira Hayes takes a look at that photograph and he asks the Marine Corps to investigate the Marine at the base of the flag in the famous photograph. And who would that be according to Gagnon? Hansen, okay? So Hayes looks at that picture because he's thinking, something doesn't seem right. And he's sure enough that that is not Hansen. So he asked the Marine Corps to investigate that Marine that was at the base of the flag in the famous photograph. And after some research, it turned out that Henry Hansen was not the man in the second photograph taken at Mount Suribachi. He was actually involved in what? The first photograph. Okay? First photograph. So after some more research, the man who was actually in the second photograph, closest to the base of the flag, was Marine Corporal Harlan H. Block. So there's your first misidentification, and that occurred in 1946. I'm sorry, should be, you talking about Hansen or Block? Harlan. Well, mine, I'm telling you, AN is right. What's it on the ID sheet?
And then on the
And it's ON here? AN is what it is. Yeah, is it? Okay. Now, ironically, when you think about this, we're talking about a controversy between which two men are in the picture? Hansen and Block. Ironically, both men were killed 6 days after the famous photograph was taken. Both men were killed 6 days after the famous photograph was taken. That's irony, that both would be killed 6 days after the famous photo. Only 2 men of these 6 walked off the island. Rene Gagnon and John Bradley. They were the only 2 that walked off. What's that? One more time? Okay, well, let me finish. Only 2 of the 6 men walked off the island. A third was carried on a stretcher with shrapnel embedded in his side, which would have been Hayes. Okay? So, Gagnon and Bradley were the only ones that walked off the island. A third, Ira Hayes, was carried on a stretcher with shrapnel embedded in his side, and 3 were buried on the island. I'll repeat this: Block, Sousley, and Strank were all buried at Iwo Jima. So only 2 of the 6 second flag raisers at Iwo Jima walked off the island: Rene Gagnon and John Bradley. The third was carried on a stretcher with shrapnel embedded in his side. That was Ira Hayes. And 3 were buried on the island that were killed: Harlan Block, Frank Sousley, and Michael Strank. Strank, Ira Hayes, and Gagnon are all buried in Arlington National Cemetery, and we will take the time to go visit their graves when we go there. So I'll repeat that again. Only 2 of the 6 men walked off the island: Gagnon and Bradley. A third was carried on a stretcher with shrapnel embedded in his side. That was Ira Hayes. 3 of the flag raisers, second flag raisers, were buried on the island: Block, Sousley, and Strank. And Strank, Hayes, and Gagnon are buried at Arlington National Cemetery, and we will go see their grave sites when we are there. Okay? Now, that doesn't end the controversy, because we've had one controversy. We misidentified Henry Hansen for Harlan Block. Luckily, Ira Hayes picked that up. Well, in recent years, evidence points out that Navy Corpsman John H. Bradley was not in this photograph at all, and he probably gets the most credit. The book and movie Flags of Our Fathers is based on a book that John Bradley's son wrote. Okay? And so it's kind of interesting, this is the way it is.